Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take the source material you give us, really get into it, and pull out what you actually need to know. The fast track to being properly informed.
Exactly, cutting through the noise.
And today, we are definitely plunging into something significant. It's a development that's, well, it's already making waves in India's gig economy, which is just massive and still growing like crazy.
It really is hard to overstate the scale.
We've been digging into the specifics of a brand new piece of legislation right here in Karnataka. It's called the Platform-Based Gig Workers, Social Security and Welfare Ordinance.
Right. It was just signed into effect May 27th, 2025 by Governor Thorochan Gilot. So very current.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We need to understand what this law really does, who it's going to affect, and figure out why everyone's talking about it as, like, a potential game changer.
Is it really a game changer or something else? That's the question.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. All those people on scooters bringing you food, the drivers getting you through traffic, especially here in Bengaluru. This ordinance is aimed squarely at them.
It's about trying to build a safety net, basically. Something they just haven't had.
It feels like a pretty bold move by the Karnataka government. So is this the revolution for gig workers people are talking about? Or is it maybe more complicated first step? Let's unpack it.
Sounds good. Where should we start? The context, maybe?
Yeah, let's set the scene. To really get why this ordinance matters, we have to understand the reality for gig workers in India before this. What's that actually like?
Well, it's a real paradox, isn't it? On one hand, these workers are totally essential for the convenience economy we all use. They're the backbone.
Absolutely. Can't imagine daily life without them now.
But on the other hand, they operate almost completely outside traditional employment structures. No safety nets, none of the standard benefits you'd associate with a job.
And the numbers involved are just staggering. You mentioned the scale.
Yeah, the Inade Ayog report from 2022 projected, what was it, 23.5 million gig workers in India by 2030. It's enormous.
23.5 million. Wow. And if we zoom right into Bengaluru, where this law is taking effect.
We're talking roughly 2 lakh, so 200,000 platform-based gig workers just in this city.
That's a huge number of people operating in this kind of gray zone.
Exactly. The platforms often call them partners, right? Which is very deliberate language.
To avoid calling them employees.
Precisely. And that means no fixed salary, no health insurance provided by the platform, no paid time off if you're sick or need a break, none of that. This ordinance is stepping right into that gap.
Okay, so that sets the stage perfectly. Let's get to the ordinance itself then. The Karnataka Platform-Based Gig Workers Ordinance 2025. What's actually in it?
Right, the nuts and bolts. What does it actually change?
Let's start with the money. How is this funded?
Okay, the absolute core mechanism here is something called the welfare fee. This is key.
A welfare fee. Paid by whom?
Paid by the aggregator platforms. You know the big names, Zomato, Swiggy, Ola, Uber, Amazon, Flipkart, all of them. They have to pay this fee on every single transaction that involves one of their gig workers.
Every single time someone orders food or takes a ride.
That's the idea, on every transaction. And is it a set amount?
For now, it's defined as a range. It can be anywhere from 1% up to 5% of the transaction value.
1 to 5%. And who decides the exact percentage?
That's still to be determined. The ordinance says the final percentage has to be set within the next 6 months.
Okay, so platforms are contributing financially, directly tied to the work being done. Where does that money actually go?
It goes into a specific, newly created fund. It's called the Karnataka Gig Workers Social Security and Welfare Fund.
Right, like a dedicated pot of money.
Exactly. Think of it like a collective piggy bank, specifically for these workers. And it's earmarked for providing essential benefits, things like health insurance, maybe access to loans later on.
Is it only funded by the platforms? No, that's important. The state government is also supposed to contribute to the fund. And interestingly, the workers themselves are also expected to make a small contribution.
Okay, so multiple sources.
But the platform fee is the really big new element here. It fundamentally shifts things by making the platforms financially responsible, transaction by transaction, for the welfare of the people doing the work.
That feels like a major shift in principle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It takes the burden of Social Security, which was basically zero before, or all on the worker.
And puts a piece of it directly onto the business transaction itself.
Yeah, which does make you wonder,
Yeah.
how will that cost be absorbed?
Yeah.
You can already hear the platforms expressing concern.
Absolutely. And it's not hard to imagine that fee eventually being factored into what we as consumers pay, like a small, welfare surcharge added to your delivery or ride.
Right, okay, so there's the funding mechanism. What else? There needs to be someone managing all this, presumably.
Yes, and that's another key piece. The ordinance establishes the Karnataka Platform-Based Gig Workers Welfare Board.
A welfare board. Who sits on this board? Is it just government types?
No, they've actually designed it to be pretty representative, which is interesting. It includes the state's labor minister, that's standard. But crucially, it also includes 2 representatives for the gig workers
Okay, worker representation, that's important.
and 2 representatives from the platforms themselves, plus someone from civil society and then various other government officials.
That is quite a mix. Platforms, workers, government, civil society, all at the same table. What's their job?
They're basically the steering committee for this whole thing. They need to oversee the registration of all the workers, make sure those welfare fees are actually collected properly.
And then decide how to spend the money.
Exactly. Their biggest task is designing and actually rolling out the Social Security schemes that the fund will pay for. And importantly, they're also tasked with creating schemes that address the specific needs of, say, women workers or workers with disabilities.
So they're building the whole support structure from the ground up, trying to get everyone pulling in the same direction, which, given the stakeholders, might be interesting.
Could be challenging, yes, but necessary.
Now, something else that really jumped out at me was the bit about algorithms, the black box problem.
Oh, absolutely. This is a huge deal for workers. So many feel like they're completely at the mercy of the app's algorithm, right? How jobs get assigned, how their ratings affect future work.
Or even just getting kicked off the platform without knowing why.
Precisely. And this ordinance tries to tackle that head on. It actually mandates algorithmic transparency.
What does that mean in practice?
It means platforms are required to reveal how their algorithms work. The stated goal is to make sure these systems aren't discriminating against workers based on things like gender, caste, or religion.
And do workers get any direct rights related to this?
Yes, they do. They get the right to access information about their own performance, the ratings, the jobs they've been given or denied, and even see the personal data the platform holds on them.
So, peeling back the curtain a little bit, trying to counter that feeling of being controlled by a system you can't see or understand.
Exactly. It's about giving them some visibility, some agency.
That sounds significant, though, getting big tech companies to genuinely open up their secret sauce, their algorithms. That's historically been, well, difficult.
It's definitely a bold requirement. We'll have to see how it plays out in terms of actual disclosure, but the intent is clear.
Okay. What else? There was something about pay, wasn't there? Simple, practical stuff.
Very practical, but incredibly important. Fair and timely paychecks. This is crucial for people often living delivery to delivery or ride to ride.
So what does the ordinance say?
It sets clear rules about how often workers must be paid, whether that's daily, weekly, fortnightly, or monthly. No more ambiguity or platforms just delaying payments without reason.
And if there are deductions from their earnings?
Any deductions have to be clearly explained and itemized on the invoices given to the worker. And critically, if a platform is late with payments, they can be hit with penalties, including having to pay interest.
Okay. So consequences for late payment.
Yes, it's all designed to ensure predictability and reliability in their income. Which, again, sounds basic, but for this workforce, it's fundamental.
It really is. Then there's the issue of being deactivated or kicked off the platform.
Another huge source of anxiety, the fear that your account, basically your job, could just vanish overnight without any warning or proper reason.
How does the ordinance address that?
It requires platforms to provide a valid reason in writing and give at least 14 days notice before they terminate a worker's account.
14 days notice. Are there exceptions?
Yes, there are exceptions for cases of serious misconduct, obviously. But for general deactivations, they need a reason and a notice, period. The idea is to stop arbitrary removals.
So you can't just be deactivated on a whim anymore. It adds a layer of procedural fairness.
Exactly. It forces platforms to have a cause, a justification, before cutting someone off from their livelihood, a step towards treating them less like disposable assets.
And trying to tie all this together, there's a new digital system being introduced.
Ah, yes. The memorably named one.
Go on.
The Payment and Welfare Fee Verification System, or PWFVS for short.
PWFES.
Right.
Sounds
Yeah.
very Governmental, what's it supposed to do?
Its purpose is actually quite straightforward, despite the acronym. It's meant to be a central digital system that tracks every payment made to every gig worker and every welfare fee deduction made by the platforms for that work.
So like a digital ledger for everything.
Pretty much. And the platforms are required to integrate their systems with this PWFES.
Mandated integration.
Yes. Now, there's a temporary measure allowing them to just self-report their payouts quarterly until the full system is up and running. But the end goal is full integration.
And the point is transparency, accountability.
Both. To prevent any funny business, make sure the fee calculations are correct, ensure the money is actually flowing from the platform to the fund as it should. It's like the digital referee trying to keep everyone playing by the rules.
Okay, that covers the main components.
Oh.
So let's talk timing. Why is this happening now? What's the backstory here?
Well, a lot of it traces back to political commitments made fairly recently.
Oh, like what?
Congress leader Rahul Gandhi made the situation of gig workers a talking point during his Bharat Jodo Yatra and also during the campaign for the 2023 Karnataka state elections. He met with workers, heard their issues,
And promised action.
specifically committing to address their lack of Social Security.
Okay, so it stems from an election promise by the current governing party in Karnataka.
Yeah.
How did it proceed from there?
The state cabinet, under Chief Minister Siddaramaiah, approved the actual bill for this back in April 2025.
But it's an ordinance now, not a bill passed by the legislature.
Right.
All right.
Because the state legislature wasn't in session, they chose the ordinance route to get it enacted quickly.
Which is faster, but temporary.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. An ordinance has immediate effect, but it's temporary. It has to be replaced by a proper bill passed by the legislature when it reconvenes. In this case, that's expected during the upcoming monsoon session.
So it buys time and creates immediate impact.
Precisely. And it's interesting because this is happening while the central government's own big plan for Social Security, including for gig workers, the Code on Social Security, 2020 has largely been stalled, not fully implemented yet.
So Karnataka decided not to wait for the center. Have other states tried something similar?
Yes, Rajasthan is the main example. They passed an act, the Rajasthan Platform-Based Gig Workers Act, back in 2023.
And how's that going?
Well, it hasn't really seen much implementation, partly due to the change in state government there. So Karnataka's move, especially using the ordinance to push it through quickly, feels like a more decisive step right now.
Okay, stepping back again. Why is this kind of intervention seen as so critical for gig workers? Remind us of the core vulnerabilities.
It really comes down to the extreme precariousness of their work. You often have people working very long hours, 10, 12 hours a day.
For unpredictable income.
Highly unpredictable income and absolutely zero job security. If they get sick, if they have an accident while working, which happens, there's no safety net, no paid sick leave, no disability cover from the platform. They're just out of luck and out of pocket.
And are there specific groups the ordinance aims to help? You mentioned women and disabled workers earlier.
Yes, the ordinance explicitly calls for the welfare board to create schemes tailored for them. Women gig workers, for instance, often face unique safety concerns on the job or issues like lack of access to clean restrooms while they're out working. The idea is the fund can support initiatives addressing these specific challenges.
So the ordinance tries to patch these holes, providing some Social Security via the fund. Insurance, maybe loans, pushing for fairer treatment with rules on algorithms and termination. But it stops short of one major thing, right?
That's the crucial point, yes. It deliberately doesn't classify these workers as employees in the traditional legal sense.
Why is that distinction so important?
Because classifying them as employees would trigger a whole host of existing labor laws, things related to minimum wage, working hours, collective bargaining rights under traditional union structures, and so on. This ordinance carefully sidesteps that.
So it creates a sort of special category, giving some benefits without full employee status.
Exactly. It's providing a measure of Social Security, which is definitely progress compared to having nothing. But it stops short of granting them the full rights and protections that come with being legally defined as an employee. For many worker advocates, that's a major limitation. It's a compromise.
Okay, that's the worker perspective. What about the platforms? How are they reacting to all this? Zomato, Uber, Amazon.
Well, as you'd probably guess, there's significant concern coming from the industry side. Not just the individual platforms, but also industry bodies like NASCOM and II.
What are their main worries? What are they saying?
Yeah. A big one is simply the cost and complexity of compliance. Setting up systems to track transactions, calculate the welfare fee, pay it correctly, integrate with this new PWFES digital system. It's more administrative overhead.
More bureaucracy, basically.
Yes. And they also raise concerns about the potential impact on Karnataka's image as a business-friendly state, particularly for tech and digital platform companies.
And the fear that these new costs will just get passed on to users.
That's definitely being mentioned. The possibility that services like food delivery or ride-hailing could become more expensive for consumers in Karnataka due to this welfare fee and other compliance costs.
That makes sense. What about the bigger picture for platforms that operate across India?
That's another major headache for them. If other states see Karnataka doing this and decide to follow suit, but each creates its own slightly different set of rules, different fee percentages, different reporting requirements, different boards.
It could become a nightmare to manage.
Exactly. Imagine trying to run a nationwide platform while juggling dozens of different state-level compliance regimes. It could create a really fragmented and complex operating environment for them.
We talked about Rajasthan's earlier attempt. How does Karnataka's ordinance really stack up against that, or maybe other international examples? Is it considered more advanced?
Compared specifically to Rajasthan's 2023 Act, which again hasn't really taken off Karnataka's ordinance, is generally seen as being a bit more progressive and detailed in several areas.
Like what specifically? Where does it go further?
Well, that point on algorithmic transparency we discussed is key. Rajasthan's law mentioned the state or the board potentially getting access to algorithmic information. Karnataka's, crucially, gives workers the direct right to access information about how the algorithms affect them.
More worker empowerment there.
Seemingly, yes. It also appears to have stronger, clearer mandates around things like fair contracts, the specific process for termination with notice, and a more structured grievance redressal system for workers.
But even so, it's not perfect. Critics still point out gaps.
Oh, definitely. As we mentioned, the big one is that it doesn't touch minimum wage guarantees for gig work. That's a core demand for many unions that isn't addressed here.
What else?
It also doesn't really offer specific protections for workers against things like customer abuse or false complaints, which can lead to deactivation. That's another big real-world issue it doesn't tackle directly.
And the potential clash with national schemes.
Right. There's a question about how this state-level system will coordinate or not with existing national things like the central government's stalled Social Security code, or databases like eShram for unorganized workers, or even health schemes like Ayushman Bharat. Creating parallel state systems without clear links could lead to inefficiency or confusion down the line.
Okay, so looking ahead, what happens next? This is an ordinance. It needs to become law.
Exactly. The absolute first hurdle is getting it passed as a formal bill in the Karnataka Assembly during the upcoming monsoon session. That's critical to make these protections permanent state law.
And in the meantime, what needs to happen on the ground?
The immediate priority is getting that welfare board up and running. They need to quickly establish the processes for registering all the gig workers' platforms, have apparently been given 45 days to hand over their worker data.
45 days, that's quick.
Yes. Then the board needs to start collecting the welfare fees from the platforms and, most importantly, begin actually designing and rolling out the first Social Security schemes, maybe health insurance to start with.
And that digital system, the PWFES.
That needs to be developed and implemented. It's supposed to be the backbone for tracking all the money, so getting that operational is key for transparency and accountability.
When you look at all this, what feels like the single biggest challenge in making it work?
Honestly, implementation. It's always the challenge with ambitious schemes like this. Well, will the welfare fund be managed effectively and transparently? Will the benefits actually reach the intended workers in a timely and useful way? Will the platforms comply fully, or will they find loopholes or ways to minimize their contributions? And what will the real impact be on consumer prices and the overall viability of the gig economy model in Karnataka?
Lots of unanswered questions.
Huge questions. You see the unions like IFAT and TGPWU expressing hope that this is genuinely transformative, but you also see the industry bodies urging caution, highlighting the operational hurdles and costs. The proof will be in the pudding, as they say.
So let's try to wrap this up. After this deep dive, what's the takeaway? Where does this Karnataka ordinance leave us?
I think it's fair to say it's a genuinely significant step, certainly within the Indian context. It's a very clear, quite bold attempt to create a formal social safety net and introduce basic fairness for a workforce that's been operating in a really precarious environment for years.
For the workers themselves, it must feel like a major shift.
It has to be seen as a glimmer of hope, at the very least. A formal acknowledgement from the state that their work matters and that they deserve some basic security, some dignity that wasn't there before.
And for the platforms, what's the message to them?
The message is pretty clear. You need to share the responsibility for the welfare of the people your business relies on. You can't just call them partners and absolve yourself of all responsibility. The cost of doing business now includes a component for worker welfare.
And for you, our listener, what should you take away from this?
Perhaps it's a reminder that the incredible convenience we often take for granted, the meal appearing at our door, the instant ride across town, it's all enabled by real people. This ordinance is an attempt to make their work a bit more secure. And that might mean the true cost of that convenience becomes a little more visible to us all.
So is this the model for the future, or a cautionary tale?
Too early to say for sure. It could become a template for other states, maybe even influence national policy eventually. Or the implementation challenges could prove overwhelming. But either way, it has definitely pushed the conversation about gig worker rights firmly into the mainstream.
Okay, let's leave our listeners with a final thought to you on.
Here's something to consider. If more states do follow Karnataka's lead, and we end up with a patchwork of different regulations across India, different rules, different fees, different systems,
Yeah.
what does that fragmentation mean for the big digital platforms whose entire business model relies on seamless, scalable, nationwide operations? How does that impact their efficiency, their costs? And ultimately, what does that mean for the workers caught in the middle and for us as consumers?
A complex web of state rules versus national platforms. That's definitely something to think about. Keep that question in mind.